Welcome to Perspective and Practice. I'm your host, Rachel Sadoff, and today we have with us Mike Saperstein. Did I pronounce that correct?
That's right. Saperstein. You got it first try.
Awesome. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm great. So, Mike, I would love to just kind of start if you could share a little bit about your kind of leadership origin story and maybe some experiences that have shaped your early views on leadership.
Yeah, I have been fortunate throughout my career. I've worked in a couple different places at this point, and I've been fortunate to have been able to observe a lot of different leadership styles along the way. And I've worked with people kind of at the very tops of some large companies, to the probably the folks who are doing more general day-to-day management as well. But I think that there are things that you can pick up from everyone and things that you can learn from everyone along the way. And for some, I think there is a lot of positive traits that you can pick up. I think that you can also pick up from negative experiences too. Well, how would you do something differently there? So for me, I have graduated from law school and kind of had a couple different careers in the telecom legal field
Yeah.
since then. So I've worked for trade associations, I've worked for companies, and worked for a law firm at this point. So as well as the government. So I've seen a couple different styles out there.
Yeah, definitely. And, law is so interesting because, I've seen a lot of lawyers that are really, really great at their trade and like super well respected, but sometimes struggle with the leadership piece. And so just kind of helping them kind of understand the other side of leadership and like business management and ownership. Have you noticed that at all as a trend?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, because one, there's not really a school for leadership, right? It's something that you have to want to develop on your own, and you have to pay attention and be intentional about growing as a leader and deciding that you want to be a leader. And the law is a particularly hard one because a lot of what you're doing as a lawyer can be individual, and so it's really making a decision that for the sake of everyone around us, we're working as a team. I'm doing my individual contributions, but how do I work to make this entire team better? And like you, I have seen some who do a better job than others at that.
Yeah. Who were some leaders you encountered earlier in your career that influenced you positively or negatively? You don't have to name anyone by name, but you could just share a couple stories if you have some.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are things that I certainly have taken away. I mean, some of the leaders, one thing that I really came to learn was the value of being upfront. If there is a problem, be upfront in how to correct it. Because kind of if you make people guess as to what went wrong or guess about what your expectations are, then you're not really setting them up to succeed and meet future expectations. And the other thing I would say is, like sometimes in life, in business, at work, sometimes are better than others. And so it's really how you handle some of the downtimes are just as important as how you handle the uptimes. And what are you doing to support those that you're working with all along? And so, like, if, for instance, like if you're having a meeting, it's tougher time for the organization. There are little things that you can do along the way to just boost morale. And it's small things. Like I remember just thinking one time, it's like, well, we're having these very early meetings. It's a tough time right now. It's simple, like bringing bagels, like would have gone a long way. I'm positive with everybody in the room to really change the dynamic of how people felt about being in there. And so I've tried to reflect on that myself. Like, what small steps can you do as a leader to change the overall dynamic of whatever meeting you're in, whatever project you're trying to lead?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. Like, yeah, like donuts, coffee,
Right.
just like small
Everybody likes it.
thank you cards.
Right.
Like that's one thing that I always try to do is I always know that people are happier when you feed them.
Yeah.
And then, just simple thank yous or thank you
Mhm.
cards or just showing intentionality is such a huge thing that sets apart often can set leaders apart from one another.
Right.
But going back to kind of what you said a little bit more, just like being upfront, like I
Hmm.
think that is such a crucial skill of, what defines like a good leader or people that people enjoy leading is like that upfrontness. And, I think a lot of times people can, be frustrated or, and just kind of ripple into this like whole conversation with themselves and they
Right.
don't actually have the conversation with the person that they're upset with. But,
Hmm.
when leaders can really learn that skill about being upfront, it's such a radical difference that people can make in their leadership.
Yeah, and part of that lesson kind of dawned on me by virtue of being a parent myself. I've got two kids, and it occurred to me that like when I'm in dad mode, like of course I'm going to tell them like do this, don't do this. This is the expectation. If things didn't go well, this is why it didn't work out. This is what I'm hoping for next time. But it's, you find yourself in the work environment and it's harder because, well, you're dealing with adults, right? So it's a different mentality, but people have their own, beliefs. People have worked hard on whatever it is they're doing. And so feedback can be difficult sometimes, but it doesn't mean feedback's not necessary and there's a right way to go about it.
And I love how you pointed out, like, you have to change your leadership style for who you're leading. Like
Right.
the way you're leading your kids and in different circumstances that you're leading your kids, can be completely different than leading a colleague or, leading, just being a leader as a parent, with a spouse or something like that. Again, you kind of change your leadership style for your spouse than you do with your kids, than you do
Mhm.
with the people on your team that you're leading. So I love that. In a couple weeks, I'm going to be interviewing someone who used to be a middle school teacher, and he
Oh,
said
wow.
everything I needed to learn about being a leader, I learned while teaching middle school.
Well, if you can do that, you can do anything. So for
Right.
sure.
So you've mentioned learning from both good leaders and those whose behavior, you didn't want to mimic. Can you share, examples of each and what you took away from those experiences?
Yeah, and one of the things that I've really tried to instill into my team is a phrase I call bias towards action. And so this is it's kind of rooted in a lesson that I'm not the biggest person, but I was on my high school football team, and so it was pretty clear I was going to be second string throughout. But I muddled through, loved the experience. But something my football coach said that always stuck with me. And he said, if you make a mistake, make it going 100 miles an hour. And so, there's a lot of times in life where you're not really sure what to do. And, I think the biggest part of wisdom is knowing when to do something and when not to do something. But it's really hard in the moment. So, like, well, should I, shouldn't I? And this line bias towards action is really just if you're unsure about what the right course is, do something. You know, if you make a mistake doing it, I will never be mad at you for going out and trying to get something done. It's going to be like if we're just sitting back and being reactive, most often that's not the right course of action. Most often there's something that you can influence by going out, talking to people, meeting people, you know, putting yourself out there. And so that's what I constantly am telling my team. We have a bias towards action mentality out there.
Yeah, no, I love it. Just encouraging people to be proactive and
Right.
be willing to fail and, skin your knees kind of
Right.
thing. And, I think our culture sometimes has gotten away from allowing people to fail.
Mhm.
We're so focused on trying to prevent them from failing that we sometimes forget the value of just like, almost like smashing something on the ground and just destroying it and like looking at the pieces and like finding ways to rebuild. Can you share a time where maybe you have epically failed and like
Oh yeah,
did
there's
you do?
lots of them. Yeah, I mean, I remember my boss one time telling me that this is the worst mistake she's ever seen in regulatory. And I was like, well, that hurt. Um, it was a circumstance where, I mean, I thought I was doing something best of my knowledge. It turns out that I didn't have all the information about things that had changed out there, and I could debate whether that was my fault or not as to the information part. But the bottom line is there was a project I was responsible for it. I didn't have all the information, so got screwed up. Um, that said, I mean, my boss didn't quit on me, right? Like it's what do we do? How are we going to go about making this better? And like that was the thing I took away from it. It was, all right, I've kind of delivered that tough news, but like, what are we going to do now? Um, and I kind of contrast that with a different boss, and just kind of a couple levels above me. And I worked with my boss to deliver a project, and we got the feedback. Well, this is exactly what I didn't want. Like, okay, well, I guess now we know what the expectations are, but there are better ways to deliver that message, or maybe be more upfront the first time. If you have a clearly defined expectation, just tell us. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the hide the ball game.
Yeah.
Just if you've got something a vision in your mind, tell me what it is, and we can work to execute it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge thing. And as you were kind of sharing about those examples, like it made me think of, well, what was the leader or your boss doing as you were executing this project that it got to such a point where it was like epic failure that they thought it was? Because where was the leadership leading you at that time? That's kind of what it makes me think of. And then like, yeah, and then just other people leadership setting those clear expectations of
Mhm.
what they're wanting up front and communicating those correctly can like also if that's not done like lead to failure that not isn't necessarily your fault.
Yeah, and look, I think there are, for me, I have always valued um, having some autonomy and some independence to go out and do the project the way I think it should be done without having to check in every moment. And so, for the vast majority of my career, that has gone well. You get some instances where it maybe doesn't work out so well. But the thing is you learn from them. You evaluate, well, I'm not going to do that again. And you learn. And I think the best part about having learned some of those lessons are you can kind of spot where people who are younger than you or less experienced may be heading in some of the same pitfalls that you ran into.
Yeah.
And so take the time to help them out.
Yeah. What are some of the things that have helped you as a leader to bounce back when you failed?
Hmm. I always try to evaluate any kind of failure by saying, did I make the best decision based upon the information that was available to me at that time? And if I come up with, I don't have a magic percentage, but more often than not, I would have gone the same direction, then okay. Like, right? Because you applied whatever kind of framework, decision-making framework, you use the facts at hand, and you at some point towards the bias towards action point, like you have to make a decision. So you make a decision, sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not. Hopefully you're right more often than not. Um, but that's really how I try to analyze any failures that I've had. And like it's never fun,
Yeah.
but it's all about trying to learn from them and grow for the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the acronym FAIL for first attempt in learning.
Right.
Uh, because if you didn't make that failure, you would have nothing to learn from and to improve for the future. So I love the idea around failing forward, and then, continuing to just learn from your mistakes. Uh,
Mhm.
I think is so important. So I want to jump back to a little bit talking about um, your bringing of the bagels and, treating people with respect. Because I know in a prior conversation, we talked about, just simple gestures of leaders acknowledging people and,
Right.
just saying good morning. And so I'm curious, why do you think simple acknowledgments are so important?
Well, I mean, we're all people, right? I mean, I think, I guess I can't speak for everybody. The vast majority of us are out there working for a couple of different reasons. We're out there working to earn a living, but we're also out there working with a sense of purpose, for building, for being, part of something bigger than yourselves and creating an environment that you want to be part of the team. And I don't think that you can get the most out of people if people don't feel seen in some way. So even just very simply saying good morning is a recognition that, hey, I see you. I know you're out there. I know you're doing good work. So, and it also, I mean, that simple kind of icebreaker
Yeah,
often leads to, well, hearing more about what's going on in their environment, and whether that be a work thing or whether that be a personal thing. Um, in either way, I think you're coming out ahead by learning more about what's going on in anybody's lives, be it on the professional or personal side.
yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned that, realizing that people are unique and they need to be approached individually. So, what
Yes.
advice would you give leaders of a team about, tailoring their leadership approach towards different people and different leadership styles?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you have to do is get to know your team, right? And so you can't walk in there on day one and expect that you're going to understand the motivations or patterns or anything about how every single person. I think you can be clear about what your expectations are. And I don't think you change your expectations for the product and work that you want done. But you do recognize that some people thrive under different circumstances than others. Some people need more feedback, some people appreciate less feedback, but it's like it's about setting the expectations and then figuring out how to get people to respond to those expectations. And we're all different. I mean, I know that I respond very differently than a lot of people in my organization, but it's part of who we are, but it's part of what makes the overall team better too. The fact that we work in different ways and people have different strengths, but it's really people want to, I think, be understood, and to anything you can do to better understand the team you're working with, the better off the entire team's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of cues into like what I wanted to talk about next regarding just generational leadership. Like you've kind of highlighted the importance of, staying connected, especially with new generations. How
Right.
do you ensure your leadership, remains relevant across different age groups?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping I'm kind of at the midpoint of my career now, right? And so I've been the young person out there. Have learned that I'm no longer that. But there are still kind of a generation or so above me as well. And it's been really interesting to kind of feel this dynamic out. Because again, there's no school for this. Like you just have to observe it and kind of internalize, well, all of this is happening. And it's happening to everybody, whether they consciously realize it or not. Um, the first thing you do is, and the field that I'm in, it's very driven by, relationships and making sure because we work together in a fairly small field and I come across the same people again and again and again. And so the type of relationship you have enables you to get things done. Because people are people and they like to work with people they're friends with.
Yeah,
Um, but the way you maintain that is you have to make an effort to go out and see people. I think one of the things that really got lost during the pandemic was the notion that we should all be out there kind of getting to know each other in person on a more regular basis. And I think it's starting to come back now. I'm seeing that pendulum start to shift, but I do think that we lost a couple of years there, where we didn't really see everyone every day. And I think that there's a skill to personal interaction that, we're all kind of redeveloping again. But, in that kind of bias towards action mindset, take some time and make it part of your job, your routine, your life to get out and talk to people because I find I'm always enriched the more conversations that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Like people that show up are the ones that go up. Like I'm a big believer of that. And
Right.
just the people with intentionality.
Right.
When
Yes.
they're really intentional about building relationships, building connections, and then, just showing up for the work that they're doing, I think is a huge part of leadership, but then also a great way to connect with different generations because
Mhm.
this is kind of like the first, I don't know, maybe it's not the first time in history, but like there's so many generations in the workforce right now. Like my dad's 77 and he's still working. And it's not because he has to, it's because he
Mhm.
wants to,
Right.
And so then you've got like people that are grandparents or great grandparents that are still working. And then you've got like the Gen Xers, and then you got the millennials, and then you got this new Gen Z. So we've got like at least solid four different generations
Right.
that grew up completely differently, that observe the way the world works in completely different ways. And then, as a leader, you have to find a way to connect with all of these.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. And I would say one, put people in getting to know them first. First. That's extremely important. The other thing I would say is that, you know, I think when in a professional environment and, you have to rely on, your interactions with many people across a large scale, like it's really important to know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Like in whatever career you're doing, like I think people gravitate towards people that, you know, can do the work and kind of show that they have substance
yeah,
behind them. And so, I think that's a leadership thing, just in and of itself. Like people have more respect when you see that your leader is out there, right there with you, doing the work with you, and they too know what they're talking about. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for, it's not just basic competency, but like really mastering and putting time and effort into whatever kind of career you're doing. And, it shows.
yeah, absolutely. I always have just kind of loved what, I don't know, I guess I call it like the Costco effect, where, you know, you're working in an industry or for a company and everybody just kind of has to start at the ground level. Everybody starts in the
Mhm.
warehouse. And then from
Yep.
the warehouse, you move up throughout the
Right.
organization. And I love that. Like we have another organization that we're working with right now, kind of helping them do their strategic plan and stuff like that. But they're the same way. Like everybody starts client facing, out in the cold because
Mhm.
they do some
Right.
work outside. Everybody starts out in the cold and then, works their way through the organization because unless you really understand the fundamentals of everybody's job and how it impacts the entire organization, like how can you really be expected to lead people throughout an organization?
Yeah, and to take that one step further, I completely agree with you. I think it's important that everybody understands that everybody's job has purpose and dignity to it. I mean, I have worked some less than glamorous jobs. I was a busboy. I worked at the dining hall doing dishes in college. Like I have done the really get your hands dirty jobs. And I think it it's really given me an appreciation for the job that everyone does and how everyone contributes to this whole society and life that we live and just the dignity of people's work in general and treating people that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to pick your brain really quick. Um, Let's talk about advice for aspiring leaders because
Mhm.
I think that's good. We're like a big part of this interview series is to really not just give advice to the senior level people, but the middle managers and the aspiring leaders. So, what is something you think first time leaders tend to get wrong? And what is a piece of advice you'd give them to help them be more effective?
Yeah, I think something that I've seen first-time leaders get wrong is either being too hands-on or not hands-on enough. And I'm a big believer there's a middle ground in there. I mean, to the point we talked about failing. You have to let people have room to go and grow and to do their thing. But it can be hard too, and you are directly responsible for the results that, the people you're managing are producing. Um, so I understand kind of the the tendencies on both sides, but I believe there is a real middle ground between making sure the work is getting done and getting done in the manner that, giving the appropriate levels of feedback, but still giving enough distance to say, okay, you've been hired to do this job. We trust you to do this job. Now go do this job and we'll check in regularly to make sure you're on the right path. So finding that middle ground, I think, is probably one of the hardest things
Yeah.
because, there's just this tendency, well, I'm going to be evaluated on this. I'm going to be evaluated on you. You have to trust the people you hire.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's definitely like the extremes of like the micromanaging leader to
Right.
like the liaison fair leader, and then where do you kind of find that common ground in the middle? And I feel like when you're young and I don't know, feeling like insecure about yourself,
Mhm.
it's easy to just like go to one of the extremes.
Yep.
So yeah, I love that. So if you could go back to when you first became a leader, you get to decide when it was, and what would you tell your younger self? Like, what's one thing about leadership, and why would you tell yourself that?
Well, the way you phrase that question is interesting because it occurred to me partway through law school, that I was really looking up to some of the people who were just in law school with me. I mean, maybe they'd been there a second, like a year or so longer. But yeah, I found myself like, and just consciously noted, like, wow, I am really kind of observing and trying to model myself after, what they're doing. And it also occurred to me, I was like, I bet this person has no idea. And so what I would say is, we are all leaders in many things at many different times, way before you even realize it's happening. And
Yep.
so I would say attack every day and every situation with the notion that someone is actually looking at you for
Yep.
how to be, how to act, how to perform
Yep.
in any given circumstance.
Yep.
So you're a leader right now today, whether you like it or not, whether you want to be or not. So you might as well make the best out of it.
No, I love that. And that's why our slogan is leadership skills are life skills, because
Okay.
we believe that everybody is a leader in some aspect of their life. Like leadership is influence.
Yep.
And in somewhere in your life, it might not be a positional place of authority like a VP position or a manager position, but you're influencing someone's life.
Hmm.
It could be a younger sibling, an older sibling, it could be a family member,
Yep.
it could be somebody on a team, it could be somebody you sit next to on the bus. Like somewhere in your life, like you're exactly right. Somebody else is watching
Hmm.
and saying, I like this or I don't.
Yep. And that's how we all learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mike,
Yeah, this
for
is fun.
sharing your
Thank you for having
journey
me.
and your leadership insights. It's been such a pleasure hearing from your experiences and lessons you've learned along the way. And, for our viewers, if you enjoyed hearing Mike's insights today, don't miss other Break the Norm leadership interviews. If your organization is interested in learning how Break the Norm leadership can help you develop your greatest asset, your people, click the link below. Thanks again, Mike.
All right. Thanks so much.